There is a curious thing about loss. It never arrives empty-handed. It comes bearing sorrow, yes, but hidden deep within it, like a seed in the soil, lies something unexpected, growth, a lesson, a turning. Often what we call the end is only the bending of the road, the beginning of something not yet visible to our tired eyes. Many of you have known loss, the job that slipped through your fingers, the relationship that fractured when you gave it everything, the dream you nurtured only to watch it wither in the cold winds of circumstance. And if you are human, as I suppose you are, you've asked, was it all for nothing? Let me assure you, it was not. The universe is not as careless as you fear. It is vast, yes, and filled with mysteries beyond the reach of your present understanding. But it is not blind. It remembers what you gave when no one was watching. It holds record of the tears you wiped quietly at night. It has not forgotten the silent courage you carried when everything in you wanted to give up. Time, though it may walk with quiet steps, is always moving with purpose, and there are seasons in which what was once buried begins to rise. Not always as we expected, not always when we demanded, but in forms that often exceed the shape of what was lost. You see, the universe, if we may use that word to point to the deeper order behind this life, is a patient craftsman. It does not repay hastily, it repays wisely, and when it does not always return to us what was taken. It often returns to us what we never knew we needed. Perhaps the love you lost carved a deeper space in you for a truer love to find home. Perhaps the job you missed was a rescue disguised as rejection. Perhaps your failures were not punishments, but invitations to build something no one else could. Grief, I have found, is not the opposite of hope. It is its companion. It prepares the soul to receive joy without arrogance. It humbles us, stretches us, and makes us fit for the blessing to come. So if you are in the waiting, wait well. If you are in the ashes, do not fear. Ashes are the soil of rebirth, and if you feel empty, remember, it is the empty vessel that is ready to be filled. You are not forgotten, not by life, not by time, not by the deep workings of the universe. And though you cannot yet see it, something is being prepared for you. Perhaps not a return of what you lost, but a reward that gives meaning to the loss itself. There is a strange kind of silence that follows loss, not the silence of peace, but the silence of confusion. When something we value disappears, whether it's a person, a goal, an opportunity, or even a version of ourselves we held dear, we often find ourselves staring into an emotional void. The world continues moving, but inside, there's a stillness that doesn't feel calm, it feels broken. And it's in that broken stillness that most people assume the story has ended, but the truth is, that's where the real story often begins. Loss is rarely final, though it feels like it. Most of what we call the end is actually a kind of uprooting. Something has been torn from us, yes, but the tearing exposes soil that has never been touched before, new territory, painful, unfamiliar ground. And that is precisely where discovery begins, not in the polished places of our lives, but in the places where we are stripped down to nothing but honesty. People talk about discovery as if it only happens in books, maps, and foreign lands. But some of the greatest discoveries happen in the soul, the moment when what you once relied on is gone, and you are forced to reach deeper than comfort allows. A person never really knows their own strength until they've been required to carry what once seemed unthinkable. Likewise, we rarely know the depth of our resilience until something collapses. It is in loss that clarity begins to surface. When the noise of achievement, routine, and external validation is silenced, we start to ask questions that matter. What is truly important? What can't I live without? What was I pursuing that no longer fits who I'm becoming? These questions don't come in times of ease. They emerge when the foundation has cracked, and we are looking for something more stable, more honest, more lasting. Think of the seed. It cannot grow until it is buried, and even then, it must break before life can emerge. The breaking feels like destruction to the seed, but it is the only path to becoming something greater. We are not so different. What we call breaking may actually be opening. Loss might be the pressure that allows our real potential to rise to the surface. The grief might just be the gateway to growth. So many people look back years after a loss and say, "I never would have chosen that path, but now I see, I discovered something about myself that I never knew was there." And this is not sentimentality. This is lived experience. The friendship that ended taught you boundaries. The job you lost forced you to build a life based on meaning, not just survival. The failure you endured gave you empathy you never had before. Every loss has the capacity to teach us something essential, if we're willing to stay with the discomfort long enough to learn. But this isn't to romanticize pain. Loss is real. Grief is heavy. There is no reward in pretending otherwise. What matters is how we respond to loss. We can allow it to bury us, or we can allow it to bury the illusions we once clung to and emerge with something stronger: truth, wisdom, perspective, and in time, often, new opportunity. You may not have asked for this path, and that's fair. You may still feel the sting of what you no longer have, but if you are honest, you may also sense something stirring inside of you that wasn't there before. A curiosity, a hunger, a quiet awareness that perhaps, just perhaps, something valuable is waiting to be found, not despite the loss, but because of it. And here lies the first whisper of repayment, not in material gain or obvious restoration, but in the depth of understanding and awareness that comes from having walked through the valley with open eyes. Loss, then, is not the absence of everything good, but the beginning of seeing good in places we never looked before. This is where the journey truly begins, because before the universe gives anything back, it teaches. It strips away what can't stay, so we're ready to receive what can. That is the paradox. What you thought was the end may simply be the excavation before discovery, the darkness before the light, and perhaps what's coming next is not a recovery of what was, but a revelation of what could be. If loss is the doorway to discovery, then time is the quiet architect that builds what comes next. But its work is rarely loud and never rushed. We live in an age that celebrates speed, instant updates, immediate answers, quick fixes. But the most important things in life are not microwaved. They are marinated. They take shape slowly, quietly, and often out of sight. And that is where many begin to lose faith, not because time failed them, but because they misjudged its silence as absence. After a loss, people often expect life to respond like a machine: input grief, output reward. But life is not mechanical, it is organic. Healing doesn't follow a schedule. Growth rarely announces itself. And restoration, true, lasting restoration, tends to occur beneath the surface before it becomes visible. The seed doesn't sprout the day after it's buried. It lies in darkness, unseen, while transformation begins out of sight. It looks like nothing is happening, but everything is. Time in its slow and deliberate movement is often misunderstood. We call it cruel when it delays what we desire, but time is not cruel. It is cautious. It protects us from premature blessings. It gives us the chance to become the kind of people who can carry what we're asking for. You may think you're waiting for a door to open, but more often, time is waiting for you to become the kind of person who can walk through that door and not crumble. The truth is, we are always changing. Even when it feels like we're stuck, we're not the same person we were yesterday. Our thoughts, our habits, our wounds, and our hopes are slowly being rearranged by the very passing of time. And some healing doesn't look like healing at all in the beginning. It looks like fatigue. It looks like withdrawal. It looks like nothing is getting better. But often, this is simply the body and soul in the early stages of rebuilding. What we often label as delay is actually preparation. When everything we hoped for is withheld, when we feel overlooked or forgotten, it's not always punishment. It may be protection. It may be alignment. Because sometimes what you want isn't ready for you, and just as often, you're not ready for it. A dream given too early becomes a burden. A relationship rushed becomes a mistake. A position earned without inner growth becomes a trap. Time knows this, even if we don't, and we are not always good judges of our own progress. There are moments when we feel like we've made no progress at all, still battling the same doubts, still aching over the same loss, still standing in the same place. But even then, time is doing its work. Every moment you choose to keep going, even without clear evidence that things are improving, you're building something. Endurance is being formed. Patience is taking root. And while those aren't glamorous, they are the foundation of everything meaningful. What most people don't realize is that breakthroughs often happen after long periods of silence. The shift is sudden, but the build-up is not. Something seems to change overnight, but in truth, the soil had been slowly softening for weeks, months, even years. A conversation leads to an opportunity. A door opens unexpectedly. A burden lifts in a moment. But all of it is the visible fruit of invisible labor. That's what time does. It works where you can't see, and it delivers when you least expect. You may not see it yet, but something is forming. The pain is being shaped into wisdom. The confusion is being refined into clarity. The weakness is turning into quiet strength. Time is stitching meaning into the parts of your life that still feel like scattered fragments. It doesn't do it loudly. It doesn't always feel comforting, but it is never wasting your experience. Not a single tear, not a single detour, not a single disappointment is being ignored by time. It gathers every moment and weaves it into what will soon make sense. And when the repayment comes, it may seem sudden to everyone around you, but you will know it was time all along that carried the pieces, that softened the ground, that healed what no one could see. You will realize that while you were waiting, you were also becoming, and that what looked like delay was actually design. Time may be the quiet architect of restoration, but grief is often the companion it sends ahead to prepare the ground. If time heals, grief teaches, and teaching is rarely comfortable. It digs, it disturbs, it brings things to the surface we'd rather leave buried. But that disturbance is not destruction, it is instruction, if we dare to sit with it long enough to listen. Because pain, when endured with honesty, becomes one of the most honest forms of education. We often try to escape grief. We try to distract ourselves, to run ahead of it, to fill our calendars and minds with noise so we don't have to feel the ache. But ignored grief does not disappear. It simply waits. It waits beneath the surface, shaping us in ways we do not understand, often bending our relationships, our decisions, and our self-perception in subtle, quiet ways. It is only when we face it, not fight it, that its real work begins. Grief does not demand that we become stronger. It invites us to become more aware of how fragile life is, aware of what truly matters, aware of the stories we've told ourselves and the ones we need to rewrite. While joy tends to expand our experiences, grief deepens them. It creates space for reflection we rarely give ourselves otherwise. In that depth, wisdom begins to form, not the kind of wisdom you get from books, but the kind that comes from wrestling with questions no one else can answer for you. Many people assume that wisdom comes with age, but age alone is no guarantee. What produces wisdom is willingness to confront sorrow without turning bitter, to sit in uncertainty without forcing shallow conclusions, to keep your heart open even when it's been broken. Grief teaches this by stripping away illusions. It exposes the thin places in our thinking, the weak structures in our emotional foundations, and the parts of us that were built on fear rather than truth. In this way, grief becomes a midwife to transformation. It doesn't give you the answers. It delivers you to the space where you begin to ask better questions. Why did this matter so much to me? What part of myself was attached to this dream, this person, this season? What have I been avoiding by staying busy? Who am I when what I relied on is no longer there? These are not casual thoughts. They are soul-level inquiries, and they only rise in the silence that grief brings. As time continues its hidden work, grief stays present, shaping the interior landscape, and while the world around you may demand that you move on, wisdom asks you to move through, not to rush, but to reflect. Because when you walk through grief without bypassing it, you don't just recover, you evolve, your empathy deepens, your perspective widens, your tolerance for surface-level living decreases, and somewhere along the way you stop asking, "Why did I lose?" and start asking, "What am I learning?" And still, grief never truly leaves. It softens, it shifts, but it doesn't vanish. Like a scar, it becomes part of your story. But unlike a wound, it does not define you by damage. It reminds you of survival. And in many cases, it becomes the very place your wisdom draws from when others need comfort or clarity. The pain you once thought disqualified you now becomes your credibility. People will sense it, not your suffering, but your depth. Not your sorrow, but your stillness. The kind of stillness that only comes from someone who has been through something and decided not to let it make them bitter. This is the hidden grace of grief. It refines your character without permission. It interrupts your plans to strengthen your purpose. It hurts, yes, but not without cause. Because in the grand, mysterious design of things, grief often precedes renewal. And those who allow themselves to walk through it honestly often come out not just healed, but changed. Not just older, but wiser. They begin to live less from reaction and more from understanding, less from fear and more from truth, and perhaps somewhere in the silence between what was and what will be, you begin to see that this pain too has been working. Not against you, but for you. Just as time did its quiet work beneath the surface, grief worked within you, preparing you, teaching you, and now wisdom is beginning to rise, not loud, not dramatic, but deep. And it will guide you into what comes next. Wisdom, when born from grief, leads us to a startling realization. Everything matters, not just the victories, not just the joyful moments, but the failures, the delays, the awkward pauses, the detours that made no sense at the time. We begin to see that what we once dismissed as wasted time, wasted love, or wasted effort was never really wasted at all. It was simply invested into a future we couldn't yet see. It is easy to measure our lives by visible outcomes. Did the project succeed? Did the relationship last? Did the plan go exactly as we imagined? And when the answer is no, we often conclude that it was all for nothing. But life does not measure value the way we do. It sees the unseen growth, the silent transformation, the way your perspective matured through that seemingly failed season. What you called wasted may have been the very thing shaping you for a purpose that hasn't arrived yet. Consider how many times you gave your best and were met with disappointment, the job interview that went nowhere, the friendship that dissolved without explanation, the years spent working toward a goal that eventually collapsed. In those moments, it felt like everything you poured out was lost in the void, but over time, patterns emerge. Skills you developed in that job you hated suddenly become useful in an unexpected opportunity. A truth you learned through heartbreak becomes the foundation for how you now teach or lead others. The discipline you built while no one was watching becomes your quiet advantage. These are not accidents. They are recoveries in disguise. Even the pain has value, not for the suffering itself, but for what it cultivated in you. Maybe it taught you how to listen without judgment. Maybe it made you slower to speak and quicker to understand. Maybe it humbled you in a way that makes others feel safe around you. These are invisible riches, and they do not show up on a resume or in a highlight reel, but they are the kind of wealth that lasts. There is no part of your story that cannot be used. Regret often whispers that certain chapters disqualify us, the years we drifted, the decisions we made in fear, the chances we didn't take. But if you look closely, even those chapters added something: insight, empathy, resilience, or simply the clarity to never go back to who you were. You didn't just survive those seasons, you learned from them, even if you didn't realize it at the time. This perspective shift, seeing that nothing truly valuable is wasted, can change how you carry today. You stop trying to rush past discomfort, and you begin to ask what it's trying to reveal. You stop resenting the things that didn't go your way and start uncovering what they taught you. It doesn't mean you have to be grateful for every wound or pretend that pain is pleasant. It means that you refuse to let your pain be pointless. And sometimes what feels wasted was actually sacred. The long nights you spent worrying over your children, the kind words you offered that were never acknowledged, the countless times you showed up with integrity when no one was watching. These things may never be celebrated publicly, but they are not lost. They are stored in the deep memory of your life, and they shape your character more than you know. Even when no one sees the seed you planted, the act of planting it changed you. This is where hope finds footing, not in the idea that everything will turn out the way you planned, but in the assurance that nothing you gave from a place of truth and love is ever wasted. The universe, or life itself if you prefer, has a way of weaving even the most fragmented moments into something whole. And while you may not see the full tapestry yet, every thread matters. So when you look back on the efforts that seemed to amount to nothing, the chapters you thought were detours, the seasons that ended without closure, understand this: they were not empty, they were not in vain. They became part of the soil from which your future is now beginning to grow, and it is often only in hindsight that we see the value in what once felt like loss. Just as grief shaped your wisdom and time patiently stitched together your healing, so too have your wasted moments been transformed into depth, strength, and readiness for what comes next. When we begin to accept that nothing truly valuable is wasted, we also begin to understand why some outcomes take so long to arrive. Because anything worth lasting, anything meaningful, requires a process that cannot be bypassed. And while effort is necessary, it is not always immediate action that moves things forward. Sometimes, the most powerful posture is not striving, but staying. Not forcing, but enduring. Patience becomes more than a virtue, it becomes a strategy. There is a quiet power in those who continue to show up, day after day, even when they see no results. People who remain committed not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because they believe in what they are building. These people rarely receive applause in the moment. They are often overlooked in a world that celebrates speed and visibility. But over time, the universe seems to lean in their direction, not out of sentimentality, but because patience and faithfulness create something solid, something trustworthy, something that can hold weight when the reward finally arrives. This does not mean we wait passively or suppress all emotion. Patience is not silence. Faithfulness is not blindness. There will be moments of frustration, doubt, and fatigue. The kind of patience that matters is not polished. It is wrestled into existence through hard days. The faithful don't always feel strong. They often feel tired, misunderstood, even forgotten, but they continue, not because they always feel certain, but because they have decided not to quit. You can tell a person's future by how they handle delay. Some become resentful, some detach entirely, but those who learn to endure with their heart still open, those who can hold tension without collapsing into bitterness, are the ones life eventually trusts with more. They become deeper, not just stronger. They build capacity not just for success, but for responsibility, because what the universe gives, it also tests, and it will not hand lasting abundance to someone who cannot hold still long enough to be transformed by the weight. The faithful are not defined by how loudly they believe, but by how consistently they align their actions with their belief. A faithful person does not stop being kind just because kindness wasn't returned. They do not stop planting seeds just because the harvest hasn't shown up yet. Their character is not dictated by external feedback, but by an internal compass, one rooted in purpose, not popularity. Patience, when practiced deeply, changes the way we see progress. We stop measuring growth by what we can count and start measuring it by what we can carry. Maybe you haven't reached the dream, but you're more grounded than you were last year. Maybe the door hasn't opened, but you've become more disciplined, more discerning, more emotionally intelligent. These are signs of progress, even if they don't make headlines, and it's often these invisible gains that become the very foundation for visible breakthroughs later. The most remarkable shifts often come quietly, not in grand moments, but in small ones. The day you decide to keep going after another rejection. The morning you choose hope when despair would be easier. The hour you encourage someone else even when you feel empty. These acts may seem ordinary, but they echo beyond the present. They signal to life itself that you are trustworthy with more, that you can be steady when the ground shakes, that you don't need proof to be purposeful. Eventually the universe responds. Slowly, subtly, then suddenly, a connection appears. A door you didn't knock on opens. A breakthrough comes in an area you thought was forgotten. And when it does, you realize it wasn't just the dream that was being prepared. It was you. Your patience made room for wisdom. Your faithfulness shaped your integrity. Your wait became your training ground, and nothing about it was wasted, because you didn't walk away when things got silent. This is what the world rarely teaches, that staying the course, even when it looks foolish, is often the very thing that positions you for the unexpected return. Not because the universe rewards effort automatically, but because it recognizes when you've become someone who no longer chases outcomes to feel valuable, but lives with value even in the absence of reward. And that shift when you start showing up not to earn something, but because it's who you are, is the tipping point, the quiet turning of the tide, the moment when your unseen work begins to draw unseen forces into motion. Not by magic, but by alignment, not through luck, but through loyalty, to your purpose, your path, and the person you are still becoming. Faithfulness does not always lead you back to what you lost. It doesn't promise that the exact dream will be restored, or that the exact person will return, or that the precise path you planned will reopen. What it offers instead is something better: transformation. And from that transformation comes a return that may not look like what you expected, but carries weight your loss never could, because when life finally answers, it often answers differently, and with more than you asked for. You may have spent years asking to get back what slipped through your fingers, the relationship you couldn't save, the opportunity that didn't work out, the dream that crumbled just as it felt within reach. But time, grief, growth, and endurance have shifted you. You are no longer the same person who lost those things, and so when life returns something to you, it will not be a repetition, it will be a redefinition. The return rarely arrives in the same shape. You may have lost one job, but been led toward a calling. You may have been rejected in one place, but developed the resilience to lead in another. You may have been stripped of something you loved only to discover a deeper strength you didn't know existed. And when the restoration comes, it's not to replace what was taken, it's to reveal what was possible all along. Sometimes the loss was simply too small for who you were becoming. That is the strange mercy in delayed outcomes. If life had given you everything you asked for at the moment you asked, it might have satisfied your longing, but limited your growth. Because some blessings are too weighty for the version of you that existed before the fire. The trials, the disappointments, the long wait, All of them were forming a foundation strong enough to hold what was coming. A foundation not of entitlement, but of depth. It's easy to romanticize the past, especially when you're still hurting. But as you evolve, you begin to realize that not everything that was lost should have been kept. Some things were fragile, some were incomplete, some were keeping you small, and some simply belonged to a version of you that no longer exists. What life returns is rarely about repeating history. It's about redeeming it. That redemption might come in the form of new relationships that feel safer and more aligned, or it may come through opportunities that match your matured values. It may not come loudly. It may arrive gently in quiet moments of clarity when you realize you no longer miss what once broke you, or that you've outgrown what you used to chase. That is a kind of return too, when your heart feels full in places that used to ache, and then there are moments when the return surpasses all expectation, not just different but greater. Not just healing, but elevation, a role that gives your pain a platform to help others, a relationship that makes your previous heartbreak feel like a necessary lesson, a life rhythm that brings you peace instead of pressure. You may realize you weren't waiting to get back what you lost. You were being prepared for something you didn't yet know how to receive. This kind of return doesn't feel like compensation. It feels like clarity. You stop trying to balance a cosmic ledger. You stop asking why it had to happen. You start to understand that life was not punishing you. It was making room. And when the new thing finally arrives, you are not desperate for it to prove your worth. You receive it not from lack, but from stability, not because it fills a hole, but because it complements the wholeness you fought to rebuild. And sometimes the greatest return is internal, the quiet confidence you carry now, the emotional intelligence that came through heartbreak, the self-respect you rebuilt from rock bottom. These are not visible on a resume or measurable by external standards, but they are real, and they shape everything you touch going forward. They are the silent evidence that the return has already begun within you. So while life may not hand you back the exact thing you lost, it often delivers something more meaningful, and by the time it comes, you won't want what you had. You'll be too busy stepping into what you never knew was possible. What you once thought was the end turns out to be the clearing for something more whole, more solid, more you. Not because it matches the loss, but because it surpasses it, in wisdom, in peace, and in purpose.